Thank you all for coming this morning. At one point I thought I was going to be the only one in this room, but I'm really happy to see we're nearly in full capacity. I'm presenting today on my PhD research. I'm only half a year into my PhD. I'm a part-time student. I also work as a research project officer at CSIRO, and that's how I'm kind of tied into the research. So I'm supervised by Professor David Pannell, along with Dr. Fiona Gibson and two of my colleagues at CSIRO, Professor Ian Walker and Sorada Tatruan, who is present here today as well. So the title of my PhD is actually on the community forestry in Indonesia and Vietnam, and in particularly I'll be looking at the factors that influence farmer decisions to adopt silviculture management. It's more in terms of the acacia plantation related topic. So let's move on to the next slide. Oh, sorry, I didn't know I was in this one. So as I said, again, this is an ASEA project. It is a 4-year project, and it started last year. And the general aim of the project is to improve the livelihood of farmers, smallholder farmers in Indonesia and Vietnam. And we're doing it through maximizing the productivities of eucalypts and acacia of these farmers. And the research itself has 4 components, and the socio-economic components is contained within the objective 4. The objective 4 itself. Oh, before I go any further, I also would like to acknowledge that there's other partners that we're working with within the project itself. So we have CSIRO as the main research coordinator, but we also have an in-country collaborator. So in Vietnam, we're collaborating with the Vietnamese Academy of Forest Science. And in Indonesia, we have the University of Gajah Mada, along with FODA, contained within the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. So objective 4 is generally created to find out how the pathway to adoptions and diffusions by better understanding the conditions that would influence effective farmer investment in forestry. And so looking at the topic, I and the supervisor come up with 3 essential research questions that we hope we can answer through my PhD research. The first overarching questions that I have is on how do we design a research or extension processes that are beneficial for farmers and thereby improve their livelihood. I mean, it seems quite straightforward and a common questions, but when I was reading the literature back in in 1998, when you look at the ASEA proceeding on acacia plantations, the distributions in Southeast Asia, they already start talking about how the farmers are not adopting the forestry technology. And then when you look at what we're doing today, and there's still a lot of literature talking about, why farmers are not adopting, it's almost as there has been a lot of progress made, I want to acknowledge here, but there seems that we are still quite, there still seems like there's an area that we can explore further. So looking at the first objective, I thought it would be good to actually also trying to understand the factors that would encourage and inhibit the adoptions of the tree-based management in Indonesia and Vietnam. What essentially it means is, what drive farmers to adopt or not adopt silviculture management. And also it would be interesting to look at, the decision-making processes behind how, like why would they choose to perform certain silviculture management, like maybe about land preparations, but they don't do thinning, or so. Just trying to actually understand the decision-making process that they go through. And from there on, I thought it would be important as well as part of the research questions to actually understand the mental models of farmers in Indonesia and Vietnam when it comes to the farm management. And I think it would be important also because there's always the underlying assumptions that if the farmer know what the expert know, then they will change their behavior, and it's not necessarily the case. So it'd be good to understand the perspective from the various expert stakeholders in terms of what they think the farm management should be and why, and if there's any differences between the mental models of the expert versus the lay farmers. So research framework. So I thought I'll just go into mental models. I mean, you may have come across through your research because it's quite an in thing at the moment, looking at mental models, especially in the risk perception journal. For us, someone with a background in psychology, it is quite a widely used model. So what mental models can help is that it provides us insight as to how people perceive the world around them. Mental models are created. Each of us has it. We form mental models through our experiences with the external environment. And so when we have the shared experiences, we tend to have to share the same mental model of how things would work and how things wouldn't work. And then it gets passed on from generation to generation. So it is not a true representation of the objective world. It may be out of sync with the world. And it is important because it impacts on how people filter information. So sometimes if what you say to them doesn't fit into their mental models, then they will filter that out. And if you say what they want to, if that fits into their mental models, then what reinforces that mental model that I have. So mental models are not always the same. They're dynamics, and as new informations come in, they get updated and it may change. So it's essentially how I see it's important for us to understand how people relate to the land and what like trees and all the different activity mean to them, and what are they trying to maximize in terms of their life. I mean, maybe the scientists are trying to maximize the productivity of the trees. Farmers are not. They're trying to maximize their livelihood, in terms of the risk, to, how do you say, to fireproof, like to reduce the vulnerability in their life. So they might have the different perspective. And that's why when we go in and say, hey, look, this is what you need to know to get more money out of your land, it's not really what they see, the most important thing in their life. So this is an example of a mental model. What could it be? So this is something that is been drawn by farmers, that trying to understand how farmers understand the soil fertility and degradation. And what the researcher was trying to understand is trying to see what the farmer did on their land to improve their soil fertility. And then by looking at what they know, and then they can identify the gap in the knowledge, and then from there on, they're trying to actually inform the farmer that way. That's one way the scientists were doing. So next, I thought I'll go in just talking about the study locations. I already made known just now that we're going to do the study in Indonesia and Vietnam. So the first study location, so the research is kind of tied in. I don't really have say over where I want to do. So it's tied into the Gunung Kidul district in Indonesia, because that's where my resources are available to me. So here's the map of the Gunung Kidul district. Drico will know very well.
I'm from there.
Yeah. So don't pull me up on any mistake, but this is this is based on the census that they have in 2012. They actually individually count the tree, acacia tree. Yeah. I can't find the same stats for Vietnam, but they have it in Indonesia. I don't know how accurate it is, but it's interesting. So the greener the color, the more acacia trees are in that sub-district. So the red one just means that there's no acacia grown in that sub-district. And what happened is ASEA wanted us to try to spread out the research activity. So when you tend to go to a certain agency to help to implement your study, that agency tend to take you to the same area. So in like the NGO group, because they have close relationship with certain like village leader. So what ASEA wanted us to do this time is look at where the research has been conducted in the past 10 years or so, and then try to find an area where there hasn't been many research activity. So we have to look at the area that acacia grown and not many, or there hasn't had a lot of research activity. So the 3 sub-districts that we've chosen are the area that hasn't had a lot of research activity. Here they are. And this is the made up pictures of Hoa Binh and Hue. So our partner in Vietnam advised us that it would be the best locations to do would be in Hue and Hoa Binh, which is quite south of Hanoi. Purely because in Hoa Binh, the farmers just started to uptake acacia. And so they thought it would be interesting to actually, if we have any extension services and research activity, we'll start from the farmer there. And in Hue, they found the farmer they are already they're very active, and they're very knowledgeable, and they're very well educated. So they thought if we have any scientific information, those farmers would be quite receptive to it. So here's some of the background reading in Gunungkidul. I also involved in a project, some project activity in Gunungkidul. So I kind of have some knowledge of it, but this is just to give you an overview of what's growing tree like for farmers in Gunungkidul. So James Rosaco from C4 done a study back a long time ago. He talks about the growing teak in Gunungkidul, and he said that the farmer there tend to produce low quality wood purely because they just don't do the proper tree management and they don't use good quality seedling. They say farmers feel that farmers don't invest resources in trees like they do with the agriculture crop, although they see trees the income from trees are very important to them. Like Octalina found that community forestry can contribute 2% to 40% of farmer livelihood in Gunungkidul, depending on the size of the farm and the intensity of the forestry activity. And farmer in Gunungkidul also has very strong growing culture. Like I said before, they see it as a low-input agroforestry system. So like when it comes to, like, for example, fertilizing the tree, they tend to do it when, if they have any leftover from the agriculture crop, then they will go and fertilize the trees. Otherwise, they don't. But teak itself is the most preferred species in the region. And acacia tends to be grown on area where teak is not viable. And there's also a growing awareness that farmer tends to harvest only when they need money. So they tend to need money when they have someone getting married or the children going to uni. So they would only go and sell the tree at that time, and because of that sort of practice, they are disadvantaged because sometimes the market price for the wood is not great. But the reason that farmers ended up having to do it is because they don't have access to any other available fund. So, but this day, through a lot of extension services, farmers are now realizing that they cannot do it. It's not maximizing their income. And so what they do is they try to grow some fast-growing tree as well on their land. So like the sengon, the albizia, I don't know how to say it. But they sell, it takes about 5 years to grow, and so they have that immediate source of income that they can sell. So I also look into the different factors in Indonesia, that like the literature in Indonesia, mainly in Indonesia. Look at the different factors that influence farmer uptakes of silviculture management. So again, James Rosecco, back in 2007, found that the inadequate access to information and inputs such as quality planting materials and fertilizer, those are the things that limits the farmer performing proper silviculture management on their land. And Padana in 2012 says similar things. They say farmers do not have the knowledge and the capital to invest, as well as there's no external factors, so there's no market for timber or. And Gerald Sebastian back in 2014 found that farmers that have large farm and that have greater on-farm and off-farm income, they are the one that is most active in timber tree management. So I thought next I'll move on just giving a bit of background for Vietnam. I'm not really familiar with the Vietnam literature, but this is some of the stuff that I think really interesting that come up. So Vietnam has gone through a rapid change in terms of the way that they organized their land certificate in 1990, and through that, they start having a lot of plantation, a lot of forestry activity. In particular is the issuance of the Red Book certificate, which I find it quite interesting. Being a communist country, all the land belongs to the country, but they have this what they call a Red Book certificate, certified land, where it's pretty much like a private land ownership where people can trade. It can be inherited, it can be transferred, and so it gives a lot of certainty to the farmer. And the 40% of the country tree plantations is actually in the hand of the smallholder, so it is quite massive. And again, tree income is important for household. They use for children education as a pension or to improve their housing. At the moment, Vietnam is using acacia. They prefer to grow acacia because it's fast growing for wood chips. And there's very minimal incentive for the farmers to grow acacia for so long. They don't command as much prices. And monoculture plantation is the most common dominant forestry type amongst the smallholder, especially for the rich and the medium wealth farmers. So, having been to Vietnam, talking to the Vietnam smallholder farmers and the Indonesian smallholder farmers in Gunung Kidul especially, you understand that the Vietnamese smallholder farmers, they tend to perform more silviculture management than Indonesia. Indonesia smallholder farmers think, the beauty of trees is not having to do anything with it. That's how they see it. But in Vietnam, they do all the land preparations, they do fertilizing, they do weeding. They're very proactive in that way. Especially in the first 3 years. And the people there are more business-minded. They have no strong affinity to acacia. Trees are just trees to them. where in Gunung Kidul you get the sense that trees is very much a culture norm. It is what symbolizes someone's status. If you have a lot of teaks on your land, it symbolizes your status. So it means more, it has that emotional connections more in Indonesia than Vietnam. So what I'm planning to do by the end of this year is trying to spend some time to collect data, looking at the mental models of farmers in Indonesia and Vietnam. And then hopefully by the end of next year, I'll be able to implement a bigger kind of survey, looking at more, maybe a choice model. I haven't actually worked out my methodology, but looking at more the farmers' preferences on what they do on the land. And then there's an extension part to this, which I haven't covered, but the project comes with requires us to perform some extension services, meaning some training program with the farmers. So I hope I'll get that done by the end of next year as well. But I'm hoping to do some sort of once I understand what really important to people, I can do certain experimental manipulations. Say, for example, one area I will have a community leader that is involved very closely with a group of farmers, and to see whether that, the uptakes of the silviculture management would be better if we do it that way versus one that just do like the normal way through like extension officer deliver the program and just leave them with it. Thank you.